diving in?
I do not. I'm here to talk to callers.
Let's dive. David in Ridgewood, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm glad I got everything. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Hi, David.
Okay. I'll tell you first, I am a Christian, but I do like to read the arguments from atheists. And, I certainly like to read, Christopher Hitchens and things like that. I had a couple questions for you guys.
Okay.
First of all, have you guys made up your mind that there's no God, or are you still open to that possibility?
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of God, but by and large, I would not assert that there are absolutely no gods under all conditions and stuff. I think there are some gods that are, we can exclude because they're logically contradictory or contradictory with reality. But I'm open. I'm a skeptic, so I'm open to believing anything, provided there's evidence for it.
Okay, so you'd still be open to the idea that the universe was created by a god, a deity, whatever that means, I guess.
Yeah, it depends on what that means.
Yeah, depending on how grumpy I am at that particular moment, I might say, to anybody trying to convince me of a god, shut the F up and leave me alone. I've heard it a million times and not yet been convinced. But, when push comes to shove, yeah, okay, fine.
See,
the possibility remains, as slim as it may look, based on decades of hearing arguments and none of them holding any water.
Yeah, there's a small problem, and I'll stop after this so you can get to whatever you want to say, but there's a problem that I discussed on last week's show and again at the North Texas Student Conference, where there's a difference between a phenomenon and the cause for the phenomenon. So I don't know how you could possibly demonstrate rationally a supernatural cause for some observed phenomenon. And I don't know how you could actually demonstrate that, which is why the people who are claiming to have evidence for the existence of God, it all seems to come up short. And it may forever be stuck coming up short.
Okay, that makes sense. My next question is, as far as what bothers you guys about religion or about religious people, but I kind of want to elaborate on what I'm saying. Is it religious faith that bothers you, or is it just religious intolerance? Like, for example, I understand why, Christians criticizing gays or telling people that they're going to go to hell, it's that but I would understand that bothering you, but the fact that some people have faith and they go to church, does that bother you guys? Or?
Yes. Well, it bothers me.
What troubles me the most about religion is just the noise that it injects into every other aspect of life, right? And that noise is coming from people who have faith in things that they can't actually prove, and yet their faith leads them to believe that they are justified in believing that stuff. And if once they think that their beliefs are justified, they're going to talk about it and think it's important and think it's worth sharing and so on. And the result is a bunch of stuff that there's no good reason to believe gets promoted in our culture. And this affects all kinds of things. It interferes with education. It interferes with science. It interferes socially. The religious intolerance is only one part of it.
Yeah, I object for both the reasons that Jeff just listed and what you said, would be the obvious reasons, but I object to it at a foundational level because of the things that it ends up doing. So this is to me why I said I object to people believing things on faith. If you have good reason to believe something, you don't need faith, and faith is not a reliable path to truth or correct understanding. Faith is indistinguishable from gullibility. You could believe anything on faith. And so we need some way to distill whether or not our beliefs are true, and that's why I object to faith.
Well, that all sounds like it makes sense, but I mean, I'm sure you know plenty of people that they don't go out judging people, and they believe in God and they kind of keep it private. I mean, do you think there's something wrong with that, or
I think they're better. Well, I don't see. That's the thing.
That's just a matter of degree. I mean, is 1 gram of, I don't know my poisons, but some tiny amount of poison that's not enough to kill you or even necessarily, harm you, does that make it okay? Well, no, really, it's if it's a unsafe thing, you probably want to stay away from it. And so that we wind up playing this game where, oh, sufficiently non-pushy, sufficiently private religion, oh, that's supposed to be okay. Well, if the basic approach to knowledge, represented by taking things on faith, is a bad idea, then yeah, there are instances of people that do that and take it to the point where it's overtly harmful, and there's people who don't, but it's still a bad idea. You get what I'm saying?
Okay. The other thing I wanted to, I know that a lot of the reasons why I believe I have had good conversations with people that are into science and who don't believe in God, but I know that they would say that it was an argument from ignorance, but I don't know how to phrase this question, but is it at least, does it sound compelling, like the argument that, like, taking evolution as a fact, saying that, like, we started out as single-celled organisms and we evolved into so many things, you know, fish and then dinosaurs and then even to humans with these complex brains, like, what do you think of the argument? Like, what are the chances that happened on its own? Like, I mean, if we were able to go back in time and look at the single-celled organisms, you know, like, what would have been the likelihood that they would have evolved into all those things without a designer? What would have been the likelihood that we would have ended up these people with these complex brains?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
The interesting thing is that while we don't know everything about that, at least we can begin to calculate naturalistic explanations. I don't know how you came to the conclusion. Exactly how do you calculate the probability that a God was involved? And then how do you determine that that's more probable than naturalistic causes? I mean, it's one of those things where if you're going to determine the probability of something, you need to know the number of times this has occurred in order to figure out your numerator and denominator. And in the case of God, we have zeros, which either results in zero or a big fat error. So, I mean, I don't know how anybody could calculate that probability, but no matter how unlikely it is. For example, if you take a deck of 52 cards and you shuffle it up and you deal out 4 hands of 13 like you were dealing bridge, the odds that you would get 13 spades is exactly the same as the odds that you would get 13 cards that you would look at and say are a complete junk crap hand. You see, it's, I don't know off the top of my head, it's a
right, and then you get the same thing again, right?
The only reason that the 13 spades appear to have significance is because we imbue it with significance. We care about getting this good hand, and the same thing goes for the universe. The only reason we look around and say, wow, this is remarkable and it seems all made for me, is because we have this big fat bias of we like to live, and so that we evolved to fit a universe and are then reflecting upon it and saying, hey, that's neat. Is very different from saying, oh, the universe was designed for me, something for which we have absolutely no evidence, or no good evidence, I guess, since there are people who would claim that anecdotal revealed evidence exists.
Okay, that sounds like it makes sense. My last thing, and I know you probably have other calls, like, it seems like do you think that religions should be able to, like, change their argument? Like, for example, you know how obviously as science goes on, they change, like, maybe at one time they thought Pluto was a planet, but now they think that it's not, you know, and, you know, as time goes on, I'm sure if we were to talk to a scientist, you know, 50, 100 years ago, you know, the beliefs have changed. Like, it seems like religion, like, I kind of get the picture that atheists always point to the Bible and they say, you know, obviously there are plenty of flaws in the Bible and things that, you know, I don't believe in, like, but at the same time, whenever religion tries to change the argument, they point and they say, oh, it's like they're still holding us to the Bible. Like, can't religious people change their arguments okay, so the Bible was written by people thousands of years ago. They probably didn't even know what a germ was.
And,
you know what I mean? Like, but religion have the same ability to change their argument as time goes on?
Hey, yeah, but David, those people 2,000 years ago were relying on what as their source of knowledge? Well, faith and claims of revelation. And people nowadays, religious people nowadays, are relying on what for their information? Faith and claims of divine revelation. So, you know, with science can honestly change over time, because science is a process where actual evidence and our actual capability of collecting evidence and analyzing evidence changes and improves and expands over time. There's nothing in revelation and faith that that justifies, oh, well, you know, those people were using faith, and faith is perfectly okay now, but we can just, we're not responsible for what people doing the exact same thing we're doing now came up with 2,000 years ago. You know, how come they couldn't, with their faith and claims of revelation, come up with the correct answer then?
Yeah, you've got to.
What's the excuse?
You've got to have some mechanism. You need some good reason to change. It's kind of funny because we were talking right before the show. For example, you raised Pluto. It's not that they once thought it was a planet and they discovered it's not. Pluto is a strange case. No, we still know what Pluto is. Whether or not we label it as a planet is something completely different. But you want to talk about big changes. Before the show, we were talking about a competing theory to the current Big Bang model. Now, I'm no expert at all, but if the Big Bang model turns out to be incorrect and this competing theory or some other competing theory turns out to be correct, the change will come because of evidence, because we have learned more and because we can point to things to show why what we thought was correct before is not correct or not as correct. But by the way, we do know enough that while the model may be whatever we discover to actually be true, or the next version of what we how we best describe reality, may be very, very different, it still has to explain all the same facts that this other model actually explains. It's not like we chuck away facts in order to appeal to a new model. Whereas when religions change, they already know what their goal is, and so they make attempts to interpret the evidence to fit the goal. The goal is always, let me demonstrate God exists, which is why you have these classical arguments for the existence of God, the cosmological, Kalam.
Right, they're starting at the end and trying to fit it in, right?
Yeah, and they fall out of favor for a little while because they've been debunked, and then they get kind of reformed and redredged up, and it's because people are interested in leading the evidence where they want it to go instead of following the evidence where it leads, and that's the difference between religion and science. You show me a good reason. If a religious organization changes their views for good reasons, I'm all for that. Hell, I'm in favor of them changing them to better views, even for bad reasons, if for no other reason than it makes things better.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like it makes sense. I mean, the last thing I want to say is it seems like, especially on the internet, that there's this animosity between the atheists and religious people. It doesn't really seem like, I don't think that needs to be. I mean, I do believe in God, but I don't dislike atheists as people, you know what I mean? Like,
I don't dislike, for example, Christians, but I completely despise Christianity. It is a morally atrocious religion when you really get down to it. This idea of original sin and substitutionary atonement and sacrifices and belief on faith and salvation from what to what by grace, it doesn't matter. We're stuck here on this planet with a brain, and we have what we know to be good tools to understand reality, the critical examination of evidence, the scientific process, the application of reason. Why would we ever stop using those unless somebody showed a better way? And so far, people haven't showed that faith is a better way. Every bit of evidence we get when people appeal to faith shows that it's a worse way, that it's less reliable. Oh, did we lose David?
Sounds like we did.
All right. Well, thanks for calling.
That's too bad. I was going to ask him what, just saying you're religious or Christian really tells us almost nothing about what his actual beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I don't know where David was coming from, but it is not at all uncommon to encounter Christians who will say, oh, I don't dislike atheists, and yet they adhere to some of the most horrific beliefs about what ought to occur to atheists after we die, which is my favorite little hobby horse.
There are also a number of moderate and liberal believers, though, that by and large, we don't have, like the Reverend Barry Layton.
Right.
Supports church-state separation, has some belief in God. I don't even know what his God beliefs really are because he doesn't put them out there.
Right.
And by and large, I think he is primarily a force for good, and I like him, but I don't think the source of his force for good is his religious belief. I think it's his reason and intellect. But yeah, I don't hate. How could you possibly hate all of any? I mean, well, I suppose if there was a right group, like hate all racists type thing. But for a broad group that can have widely different beliefs, there's thousands of denominations of Christianity that disagree on everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, not an enemy of all Christians.